My daughter was beaten by her boyfriend, and the hospital blamed me for raising her wrong. But when the real story came out, every accusation they'd thrown at me collapsed under the weight of her quiet confession. Hey, Reddit. I really need to get this off my chest. I don't even know where to begin, honestly. My name's Sonia, I'm 48, and I've spent more than half my life behind a salon chair, snipping, coloring, and listening to the endless stories of Barranquilla, Colombia. This city, my home, it's a living, breathing thing, you know? Our neighborhood is a riot of color. Houses painted every shade of the rainbow, spilling out onto narrow, sun-baked streets where the music never really stops. Cumbia, salsa, reggaeton, just pumping through the air until the early hours. It's the kind of place where everyone's in everyone else's business, where you can't walk down the block without someone yelling your name from a balcony, asking how your kids are, what you're cooking for dinner. And that's the thing, everyone sees everything. Or at least they can. But in places like this, it's also terrifyingly easy for people to pretend not to see when it's inconvenient, when the truth is a little too ugly, a little too close to home. Before that night, before everything went sideways, our family life felt, well, it felt normal. I mean, as normal as it gets when you're a single mom of two, hustling every day to make ends meet, making sure there's food on the table, uniforms for school, a little extra for a treat now and then. Lila, my daughter, she's 20, and my son Mateo, he's 15. We had our share of teenage drama, of course, the usual squabbles, the occasional moody silences, but nothing that ever felt truly wrong. I thought I was doing a good job. I worked my fingers to the bone, saved every peso, tried to instill good values, tried to give them a better life than I had. I genuinely believed we had this solid foundation, this little bubble of normalcy that would protect us. God, I remember that night so vividly. The heat, even after dark, was suffocating, thick and humid. The frantic call from our neighbor, her voice a terrified whisper cutting through the usual street noise. My stomach dropped straight to my feet. Running through those familiar streets, my sandals slapping against the hot asphalt. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. And then seeing Lila. Her face was a mess. Bruised, swollen, a dark, angry split in her lip that was still weeping blood. Her fingers, when I took them, were shaking uncontrollably, and one was bent at this sickening, unnatural angle. I scooped her up somehow, the fear giving me this animal strength. The short, frantic dash to the emergency room, the sterile white lights of the entrance blazing, the sharp, cold smell of disinfectant hitting me after the sweaty, vibrant chaos of the street. I remember thinking as we crossed that threshold, as the automatic doors hissed shut behind us, okay, the worst is over now. We're inside. We're safe. They'll help her. I squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her, trying to reassure myself. I was so wrong. That was just the beginning. The real nightmare was only just starting. God, thinking about it now, the signs were all there, weren't they? How could I have been so blind? Lila had been seeing Bruno for almost a year before that night. At first, he seemed charming, I guess. He had that easy smile, always complimenting my cooking when he came over, calling me Doña Sonia, with that respectful tone that just disarms you. He'd even help Mateo with his homework sometimes, making him laugh. He could turn on the charm, all right. He was good at it. But I would later realize, with a sickening lurch in my gut, that he was a completely different person behind closed doors. A different person entirely. Looking back, there were always these little things that made me uneasy, these subtle shifts in Lila that I just minimized, dismissed. She'd always been so vibrant, full of laughter, gossiping with her friends, singing along to the radio while she helped me with chores. But gradually, her light started to dim. She'd get quiet on the phone, her voice barely a whisper, even when she knew I was in the next room. She started wearing long sleeves more often, even when the Barranquilla heat was absolutely suffocating, saying she was cold or didn't like her arms. Her eyes sometimes would just look hollow, like something inside her had just gone out. I remember asking her, "Lila, mi amor, are you okay? You seem a little down." And she'd just shrug, a tiny, almost imperceptible flinch in her shoulders, and mumble something about being tired or stressed with school. I told myself it was just the usual teenage drama, or maybe the first serious relationship jitters. I didn't want to pry too much and push her away, you know? I wanted her to trust me, to come to me if something was really wrong. And that's the thought that absolutely crucifies me now. What makes this even harder to stomach, what truly twists the knife in my heart, is that night wasn't even the first time Lila had been to that very hospital because of Bruno. No. Weeks before, maybe 2 months or so, she'd come home looking pale, clutching her left wrist. It was swollen, angry looking. "What happened, mija?" I'd asked, my voice sharp with concern. She'd looked away, down at her feet, and mumbled something about a sprained wrist and a stairs accident at Bruno's place. She'd been so insistent, so quick to explain it away, almost too quick. My gut had tightened then, a cold knot forming in my stomach, but she just kept repeating, "It was an accident, Mama, really. I just missed a step." I took her to the same emergency room. They x-rayed it, confirmed it was a sprain, wrapped it up. I remember feeling a prickle of something, a shadow of doubt. But she looked so miserable, so ashamed, that I let it go. I believed her. Or at least I wanted to believe her. And here's the kicker, the part that still makes me want to scream into a pillow until my throat is raw. According to her later confession, a different doctor at that time, a man with a thick mustache and a tired smile, had quietly pulled Bruno aside. Bruno had been there, playing the concerned boyfriend, hovering nervously. This doctor, this professional, had shaken Bruno's hand, given him a knowing wink, and joked, "You have to be careful with these fiery girls, eh? They break easily if you're not careful." Can you believe that? A doctor, in a hospital. Not a word about the actual injury. Not a question about how it really happened. Just this disgusting, enabling joke. It's on her record, too, buried in the notes from that visit. Patient states accidental fall downstairs. No further investigation, nothing. The signs were there, written down, plain as day, completely ignored by the very people meant to help, to protect. And to think. I walked out of there, holding my daughter's sprained wrist, thinking it was just an unfortunate accident. Oh God. The rage I feel now, the sheer burning fury at that memory, it's almost unbearable. I should have seen it. I should have known. That horrific night, the memory of it is etched into my soul, a burning scar that flares up every time I close my eyes. I was just finishing up dinner. The smells of rice and beans still lingering in the air. Mateo was doing his homework, and Lila was supposed to be at a friend's house. The street outside was doing its usual nightly symphony of music and chatter. Then the phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the background noise. It was Doña Elena, our neighbor from 2 blocks over, her voice a terrified, breathless whisper, practically unintelligible at first. Sonia, you need to come. It's Lila, at Bruno's place. Something's happened." My blood ran cold. The phone almost slipped from my suddenly clammy hand. My stomach lurched, dropping straight into my feet, a familiar, sickening dread blooming in my chest. I didn't even grab my keys, just sprinted out the door, the hot night air a suffocating blanket around me. The short run felt like an eternity. Each step was a frantic drumbeat, a prayer, a curse. When I burst through the gate of Bruno's house, which was usually so boisterous, it was eerily quiet, the music silenced. And there she was, my Lila. She was huddled on the small porch, under the dim flickering light of a single bulb. Her face. Oh God. Her face. It was a canvas of purple and red, already swelling. A dark, angry bruise blooming across her cheekbone. Her left eye was nearly swollen shut, and her lip, her beautiful full lip, was split open, weeping a slow, steady stream of blood down her chin. Her usually bright, expressive eyes were wide with shock and pain, brimming with unshed tears. When I reached her, I saw her left hand, clutched tight to her chest. One of her fingers, the ring finger, was bent at this sickening, unnatural angle, clearly dislocated. It looked so fragile, so broken. A whimper escaped my lips, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. The sheer, raw terror of seeing my daughter, my vibrant, laughing Lila, reduced to this, was like a punch to the gut. It knocked the air right out of me. I didn't even think. My arms just moved, scooping her up, cradling her against me. She was whimpering, a tiny broken sound that tore at my heart. The fear gave me this animal strength, this desperate need to protect her. I practically flew back through the streets, her weight surprisingly light in my arms, her head resting against my shoulder, her blood smearing on my blouse. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs, each beat a frantic plea for her safety. The short, frantic dash to the emergency room was a blur of flashing streetlights and the desperate rasp of my own breath. The sterile white lights of the entrance, the harsh, cold smell of disinfectant. It all hit me like a physical blow after the sweaty, vibrant chaos of the street. I remember thinking, as we crossed that threshold, as the automatic doors hissed shut behind us, okay, the worst is over now. We're inside. We're safe. They'll help her. I squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her, trying to reassure myself. I was so wrong. The real nightmare was only just starting. We got her checked in, a blur of forms and hurried questions from a harried-looking clerk. They led us to a cubicle, the thin curtain offering little privacy from the murmuring chaos of the ER. A few minutes later, a doctor, a man with tired eyes and a stern jaw, pulled me aside, stepping just outside the curtain. His tone, even before he asked the question, was already accusatory, heavy with judgment. "What happened here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over my disheveled appearance, then back to me, an almost palpable disapproval in his eyes. My voice was a shaky whisper, thick with fear and a terrible, familiar dread. "Her boyfriend hit her," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. His face hardened instantly. Any trace of professional neutrality vanished, replaced by a cold, dismissive look. "Girls don't end up like this overnight," he replied, his voice loud enough for other patients and staff in nearby cubicles to hear, the words cutting through the air like a knife. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a verdict. My cheeks burned with a sudden hot shame, a feeling that coiled in my stomach. Just as I was trying to process his insinuation, a nurse, a woman with a stiff bun and a perpetually unimpressed expression, walked by and chimed in, her voice low but piercingly clear. "This is what happens when parents don't set boundaries." She didn't even look at me, just muttered it under her breath, a dismissive flick of her wrist as she walked past. They didn't ask about Bruno. Not a single question about him. Not his name, not where he lived. Nothing about filing a police report. They didn't ask if Lila was safe now, if I was safe. They just looked at me. Their eyes, their tones, their every dismissive gesture, it all screamed one thing. My fault. I stood there reeling, the accusations landing like physical blows, far worse than any punch Bruno could have thrown at me. The fear for Lila was still there, a constant thrum beneath my skin. But now it was joined by a rising tide of confusion, anger, and a deep, burning sense of injustice. I was supposed to be her protector, her advocate, and here I was, being treated like I was the cause of her pain. It was infuriating. It was disgusting. And it was only just the beginning. I stood there, feeling like all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping in the sterile, cold silence that followed their accusations. It wasn't Lila on trial. It was me. Every single fluorescent light bulb in that ER seemed to glare down, illuminating my disheveled hair, the bloodstain on my blouse, the desperate fear in my eyes, all of it screaming guilty. Shame, hot and prickly, a venomous serpent, crawled up my spine, coiling tight in my throat. It felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to even stand upright. My cheeks burned, a deep, mortifying flush spreading across my face, even though I knew, deep down, that I had done nothing wrong. But their looks, their dismissive mutters, they made me feel wrong. My own history, a ghost I thought I'd buried deep, clawed its way back to the surface. Lila's father. The same kind of violence. The same veiled threats. The same sickening justifications. The way he'd twist words, making me believe his anger was my fault, my provocation. I'd walked away from that hell years ago, picked myself up, dusted off the pieces, and sworn I'd protect my children from ever knowing that kind of pain. I'd dedicated my life to showing Lila what love should look like, what respect should feel like. But now, seeing her bruised and broken, hearing these strangers echo the same insidious blame, a horrifying question twisted in my gut. Had I, despite all my efforts, all my sacrifices, somehow taught her that this was normal? Had I, by my past silence, by my own struggles, inadvertently shown her that this was an acceptable part of love? A lesson passed down through generations of women in our neighborhood who kept their suffering behind closed doors. The thought was a fresh wound, more painful than any physical blow. Every glance from a passing nurse, every hushed conversation among the staff, felt like a verdict being read aloud, a condemnation. Bad mother, careless mother. A mother who raised a girl who chose badly. The air in the cubicle felt thick with their judgment, suffocating me. I could feel my hands trembling, an almost uncontrollable tremor. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to defend myself, to defend Lila, but the words were stuck, choked by the shame and the overwhelming terror for my daughter. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on Lila, who lay pale and still on the gurney, her eyes closed, a single tear tracing a path through the dried blood on her cheek. But the real breaking point, the moment something truly snapped inside me, came when a social worker finally arrived. She was a woman in a severely wrinkled uniform, her face etched with a kind of resigned weariness that spoke volumes about how many times she'd seen this exact scenario. She didn't even acknowledge me beyond a cursory glance. Instead, she leaned over Lila, who was still in pain, still vulnerable, still trying to process the trauma. And in a tired, almost robotic voice, devoid of any genuine empathy, she asked the question that made my blood run cold. "What did you do to make him so angry?" The words hung in the air, a poisonous, insidious accusation. I saw my daughter flinch. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body, a subtle tightening of her jaw, a flicker of pain in her half-closed eye. But I saw it. I saw the way her young, battered spirit recoiled from the implication. In that moment, watching her, seeing the shame and self-blame wash over her face, something deep inside me, something dormant and scarred from my own past, ignited into a cold, fierce inferno. The shame that had choked me moments before evaporated, replaced by a searing, protective rage. I had taken the blows once. I had swallowed the blame, the accusations, the justifications for violence. I was not, under any circumstances, going to stand there silently while they made my daughter believe she deserved hers. Not again. Not ever. In that moment, watching Lila flinch, seeing the raw, innocent pain and self-blame wash over her already battered face, something inside me didn't just snap. It solidified. The hot, prickly shame that had been suffocating me just moments before evaporated, replaced by a quiet, ice-cold rage that settled deep in my bones. It wasn't loud, it wasn't screaming, but it was absolute. It was the kind of rage that made my vision sharpen. The sounds of the chaotic ER recede, leaving only a crystal-clear focus on my daughter and the people failing her. My hands, which had been trembling, stilled. My spine straightened almost imperceptibly. I felt a surge of cold energy, like a jolt of electricity, running from my scalp down to my toes. I had taken the blows once. I had swallowed the blame, the accusations, the justifications for violence. I was not, under any circumstances, going to stand there silently while they made my daughter believe she deserved hers. Not again. Not ever. I reached for Lila's hand, my fingers gently intertwining with her uninjured ones. Her skin felt cool and fragile, a stark contrast to the burning inferno inside me. I squeezed her hand lightly, a silent promise, a transfer of strength. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone, one I barely recognized as my own, stripped of all its usual warmth but filled with an unwavering resolve. "Mi amor," I whispered, my gaze locked onto hers, trying to convey everything with my eyes. "Do you want to tell the whole story? To me and to them?" I nodded subtly towards the social worker and the doctor, who were both looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and mild surprise at my sudden change in demeanor. Lila hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting between my face and the cold, unfeeling faces of the staff. Then, with a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was barely a movement, but it was enough. It was everything. I straightened up, turning my full attention to the social worker and the doctor. My voice, though still quiet, carried an edge of steel that made them pause. "We want to file a formal report," I stated, my eyes meeting the social worker's tired gaze without flinching. "And we request a different social worker. And a psychologist." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Immediately. As per the hospital's own patient rights posters on the wall, which clearly state her right to adequate support and protection, free from judgment." I gestured subtly towards a faded poster near the entrance, its words about patient dignity now seeming like a cruel joke. The social worker's eyes rolled, a slow, dismissive rotation that spoke volumes. The doctor scoffed, a soft, derisive sound that grated on my nerves. "Señora," the social worker began, her voice dripping with condescension. "We are very busy. We have procedures. You can't just demand—" That's when I pulled out my phone. My movements were slow, deliberate, making sure they saw exactly what I was doing. I unlocked it, navigated to the voice recorder app, and with a clear, audible click, I pressed record. I held it up, not pointing it at anyone aggressively, but simply making its presence known, making it clear that every word spoken from that moment on would be captured. The air in the cubicle changed instantly, becoming thick with an uncomfortable, brittle silence. The social worker's eyes widened slightly, her condescending smile faltering. The doctor's jaw tightened. "I am not demanding," I said, my voice still calm, but now laced with an undeniable authority. "I am requesting what is legally and ethically owed to my daughter, and I will document every dismissive comment, every blame-laced question, every refusal to provide the care and protection she deserves." The intimidation started immediately. A different nurse, one who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward, her arms crossed, her expression belligerent. "If you keep making a scene, Señora, we'll discharge her, and you can go to another hospital." Her words were a chilling threat, a direct hit to my deepest fear, that they would abandon Lila, leave her vulnerable and unsupported. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My breath hitched. The thought of being turned out, of having to find another ER, another doctor, another fight, while Lila was still injured and traumatized, was terrifying. Then, the doctor who had initially spoken to me stepped closer. His voice was low, menacing, a barely veiled warning. "Accusing staff, making recordings, this kind of behavior can complicate your daughter's treatment. You might find resources become less available." He emphasized complicate with a sneer, and my blood ran cold. They were threatening to deliberately hinder her care, to make her suffer more, just to punish me. I felt a wave of nausea, a sudden weakness in my knees. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. I was just one woman, standing against an entire system, and they held my daughter's well-being in their hands. I must have swayed, because Lila's grip on my hand tightened. I looked down at her, her eyes still swollen but now wide open, fixed on mine. And then, so softly, I almost didn't hear it over the frantic thumping of my own heart, she whispered, "Don't stop, Mama." Her voice was a fragile thread, but it was clear, unwavering. It was a lifeline. It was a command. In that moment, her quiet bravery, her unwavering trust, reignited the inferno inside me, pushing the terror back, solidifying my resolve. I would not stop. Not for anything. The pressure in that moment, after Lila's whisper, was immense. It felt like the air itself was thick and heavy, pressing down on me, trying to crush my newfound resolve. The nurse's threat to discharge Lila, the doctor's thinly veiled warning about complicating her treatment, they clawed at the edges of my mind, whispers of fear trying to take root again. My stomach still churned with anxiety, a cold sweat pricked at my hairline. But then I looked at Lila again, Her small, brave face and her words, "Don't stop, Mama," echoed in my ears, a clear, ringing bell cutting through the noise. It was a jolt, a surge of purpose that pushed the terror back, steadying my breath, making my grip on the phone unwavering. I wasn't just fighting for her physical safety anymore. I was fighting for her truth, for her dignity. Miraculously, or maybe just because I wouldn't back down, a different social worker eventually arrived, accompanied by a younger psychologist. This new psychologist, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, was a stark contrast to the jaded, accusatory staff we'd encountered. She spoke softly, her voice calm and reassuring, creating a small, fragile bubble of safety in the chaotic ER. It was during this calmer moment, with the new psychologist sitting patiently, offering Lila a warm, encouraging smile, that my daughter finally spoke up fully. Lila was hesitant at first, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes still darting nervously around the cubicle. But the psychologist was incredible, just listening, not pushing, just holding space. And then, slowly, haltingly, the words started to come. My heart shattered and rebuilt itself 100 times over as I listened. She confessed everything. This wasn't the first time Bruno had hurt her. The bruises, the pushes, the shoves, they had been happening for months. Little things at first, tiny nips at her confidence, then escalating to physical shoves, always followed by tearful apologies and promises that he'd never do it again. She'd always believed him. She'd always wanted to believe him. Then came the gut punch, the revelation that made my blood run cold and then boil with a searing rage. She spoke of her previous visit to this very hospital, the one I'd dismissed as a sprained wrist and a stairs accident. My daughter, her voice trembling, recounted how Bruno had pushed her down the steps at his house during an argument, dislocating her finger and twisting her wrist. She remembered the pain, the shame, the fear. And then she dropped the bomb. A different doctor at that time, the one with the thick mustache, had pulled Bruno aside. Bruno, playing the concerned boyfriend, hovering over her, a performance for the hospital staff. And that doctor, the one who was supposed to protect her, to see the signs, had actually shaken Bruno's hand, given him a knowing wink, and joked, "You have to be careful with these fiery girls, eh? They break easily if you're not careful." My entire body went rigid. I felt a cold, sickening lurch in my gut, a wave of nausea so intense I thought I might actually vomit. It wasn't just neglect, it was complicity. It was a direct, sickening validation of his violence, delivered by a supposed professional. It was on her record. On her record. Buried in the notes from that visit, patient states accidental fall downstairs. No follow-up, no flags, no questions. They had seen the signs before, had the evidence in their own files, and they had done nothing but enable him and shame her. They hadn't just ignored it. They had actively participated in the cover-up, even if unconsciously. This revelation didn't make me doubt my actions in the slightest. There was no more internal debate about whether I was being too much or making a scene. My resolve, which had been forged in the fire of fear and anger, solidified into something unshakable, hard as diamond. It wasn't about my parenting anymore, not in the way they tried to frame it. It was about a system, a culture, a place of supposed healing that had failed my daughter, not once, but twice. It was about casual misogyny and institutional indifference that had allowed a predator to walk away with a pat on the back, while my daughter suffered in silence. The shame I'd felt earlier, the self-recrimination about my past choices, they all fell away. The blame wasn't mine to carry, it was theirs. I couldn't undo what Bruno did to Lila. I couldn't undo what I'd once allowed her father to do to me, the silent suffering I'd endured. But I could stand here, now, in this moment, and fight for her with every fiber of my being. And then, as if she could read the maelstrom of emotions raging inside me, Lila reached out her uninjured hand and gently squeezed mine. Her eyes, though still bruised and swollen, met mine, clear and steady. And so softly, so profoundly, she whispered, "Mama, it wasn't your fault." Those words, those 4 simple words, hit me with the force of a tidal wave. All the tears I'd held back, all the grief and fear and guilt, burst forth. A sob tore through my chest, raw and ragged. I squeezed her hand back, clinging to her truth. In that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes the bravest confession isn't about what happened to you. It's about finally saying out loud who really caused the harm, no matter how many people preferred to blame you instead. It was about her reclaiming her narrative, and in doing so, freeing me from a blame I never deserved. It wasn't my fault. It was never my fault. And now, armed with that truth, I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't stop. Not for a second. The moment Lila's words, "Mama, it wasn't your fault," had resonated through me, it was like a switch flipped. The tears still flowed, hot and heavy, but beneath them, a bedrock of resolve had formed, hard and unyielding. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and a fierce, almost obsessive focus that surprised even me. My salon went quiet for a bit. My clients understood, sending food and quiet prayers. I went higher. I filed a detailed, blistering complaint with the hospital's internal ethics committee. Every dismissive word, every shaming glance, every threat, it was all laid out, verbatim, with dates, times, and the names I'd managed to catch. My recordings were attached, undeniable evidence, audio files of their callous indifference and outright threats. The sound of their voices, cold and accusatory, played back from my phone, felt like a punch to the gut each time, but I pushed through it. Then I went to the local health authority, the Secretaria de Salud. Another stack of papers, another recounting of the nightmare. But this time, I felt less like a victim and more like a warrior. Each word I wrote down a blow against the injustice. My hand ached, but I kept writing, kept detailing. I also reached out to a local women's rights organization, Mujeres Valientes de Barranquilla. A friend from the salon who'd been through her own struggles with an abusive husband years ago gave me their number, her eyes full of understanding. Walking into their office, away from the sterile hospital and the gossip of the streets, felt like breathing fresh air after being suffocated for days. They were incredible. They didn't just listen, they believed me. They helped us frame everything legally, strategically, making sure every I was dotted and every T crossed, turning my raw anger and Lila's quiet confession into a precise, unassailable case. They made me feel seen, heard, and powerful for the first time in a long time. The hospital, predictably, tried to downplay it. They sent boilerplate apologies, tried to offer mediation with the staff members involved, as if that would erase the trauma or the institutional failure. But I wasn't having it. Mediation won't bring back my daughter's sense of safety, I told them, my voice steady, and it won't change your policies. With the organization's guidance, we decided to escalate. We leaked the story, anonymized at first, of course, to protect Lila's privacy during the initial backlash, to a local journalist who specialized in domestic violence cases. She'd heard whispers of similar issues in that ER before, of women being dismissed, of blame being shifted. She was hungry for the truth. The article, when it finally hit the local newspaper, was like a bomb going off in our quiet Barranquilla. It didn't mention names initially, but the details were unmistakable. The specific ER, the tone of the staff, the casual blame, the doctor's sickening, fiery girls joke during the previous visit. It resonated with so many women in our city, in our country, who had faced similar dismissals, similar judgments. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured into the newspaper, phone lines lit up at the women's organization, and angry comments flooded online forums. The hospital couldn't sweep it under the rug anymore. The headline screamed about systemic failures and institutional complicity in domestic violence, not just in that ER, but hinting at a broader issue. It hit harder than any punch Bruno ever threw because it exposed not just one man's violence, but an entire system's. Suddenly, the hospital opened a full-blown investigation, driven by public outrage. They couldn't ignore it any longer. 2 staff members, the doctor with the tired eyes who had initially accused me and the nurse who'd threatened to discharge Lila, were formally reprimanded and moved out of frontline roles, away from vulnerable patients. The social worker, too, faced internal review. More importantly, mandatory training on handling domestic violence cases, something so basic and necessary, was finally implemented for all ER staff, like they'd just discovered it was a good idea. There was even talk of a designated private intake area for DV victims, free from prying eyes and judgmental ears. Lila, my brave, beautiful Lila, finally received the proper support she deserved. She was connected to a wonderful counselor through the organization, someone who truly understood the nuances of abuse and trauma, and slowly, painstakingly, she began to heal. The bruises faded, but the emotional scars were deeper, requiring patience and professional care. And with the organization's help, we filed charges against Bruno. He's facing consequences now, real ones. It's a long road through the legal system, but it's a road towards justice. And that feels like a victory in itself. As for me, I was no longer the silent, ashamed mother hiding in the corner, trying to make excuses for something that wasn't my fault. I became the woman other moms in the neighborhood started approaching, quietly, tentatively, at the market, outside the school, or even at my salon. They'd come in, asking for a trim or a color, but then, their voices dropping to a whisper, they'd share their own fears, their own suspicions. "Sonia," they'd ask, their eyes wide with worry, "what can I do if this happens to my daughter? What are my rights? Who do I call? How did you fight them?" I shared everything. My recordings, the organization's number, the names of the good people who helped, the steps to take. I became an unlikely resource, a voice for those who felt voiceless, a testament to the power of fighting back. It feels heavy, this new role, but it also feels right. I fought for my daughter and for justice, and we won some important battles. We made a change, a real, tangible change in a system that was failing women. But the initial trauma, the blame they tried to heap on me, and the fight itself, God, it took a toll. I still replay those moments in my head. The doctor's sneer, the social worker's accusatory question, the absolute terror of being threatened with Lila's discharge while she lay hurt and vulnerable. The exhaustion is deep, woven into my bones. The anger, though righteous, still flares up. I'm stronger, yes, but I'm also tired in a way I never was before. A profound weariness that settles when the fight is over, and you finally have a moment to breathe. So, Reddit, after all of this, after exposing a hospital, after demanding accountability to such an extent that it became a public scandal, after going to war for my daughter's truth and seeing changes implemented and justice pursued, was I the asshole for going to such lengths? Or was I justified in everything I did to protect my daughter and ensure the truth finally came out?